Hinduism is a really complex series of beliefs that is incorporated into one religion, but really you could say there are as many forms of Hinduism as there are Hindus, which suggests that the overall structure of the belief is highly individual and highly flexible, which is true. The other thing about Hinduism, I think it's really necessary to have spent time in India to fully understand it, which means those of you now taking this course now have to go to India at some point in your life. It's actually part of the long-term homework assignment. And I've been to India 3 different times, and each time have had extraordinary experiences with different sorts of people and different aspects of the religion, because the religion is so deeply integrated into the way of life. So if you look at the sacred cow in the middle, the first time I went to India when I was a junior in high school, I went to Delhi to visit my dad. It was at a psychology conference, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was flying in from England, and all of a sudden we were driving in this van, and we were coming into the city of Delhi, and there were a series of cows on the road. And because cows are sacred, you can't disrupt them. So the van stopped, and there were mainly Westerners in it, riding, trying to get to their hotel. And there's, as you can imagine, a huge amount of frustration. And the driver explained, look, there are some things in life, right? Sacred things need to come first. You need to put them first. And so you need to accept that this cow is in your way, and that's just the way it's going to be. So again, this idea of putting the sacred in front of your daily life, as you can see here, it can be highly frustrating, but it is this idea that the sacred comes first in India. The 2 people on the left, Sri Chakravarti was a healer, and my father had gotten very sick before I was going to go over. We were going to go hiking in the Himalayas, and it wasn't going to happen because he was very, very ill with some sort of stomach problem. And anyway, he was taken to see this healer by my mother, much against his wishes, because he was both an atheist and a skeptic and didn't believe in any of the sort of the folk traditions of Hinduism. And so Sri came in and had this diagnostic hand and basically healed him against his wishes, which was fascinating. And so she had this diagnostic hand, and this diagnostic powers and healing powers that had come from a long lineage of healers through another prophet named Sai Baba of Shirdi, who was again a famous guy in the 19th century. So there are not just healers that draw on these kind of powers of the gods and the religion itself, but there are also, as you can see on the right-hand side, Hindu street shrines everywhere. So there are shrines to every form of god and goddess that you can imagine, because Hinduism is, at least as Westerners see it, a polytheistic religion. But really, when you look at it, these are all manifestations of a sacred unity. They're all parts of a bigger aspect of God. So as Westerners, we tend to define God as something that's fairly gender specific, up in heaven. In Hinduism, the gods and their processes are everywhere, all around us. And so there's no one right way to manifest what God is. And so you see gods everywhere, and you see them being worshipped in many, many different ways. Going back to the left-hand side, Father B. Griffiths is a Benedictine monk who went to live in India. He was originally a Catholic, but went to study Hinduism and saw no contradiction between his understanding of God as a Westerner and the understanding of God that came out of Hinduism. So interestingly, if you begin to develop a more flexible idea of what God is, it tends to lead you toward what Hinduism is. He eventually was almost excommunicated from the church because of that. Interestingly, he was a student of C.S. Lewis, who was a famous writer of the Narnia Chronicles, if you've read those or saw the movie. So again, an Englishman who became a Hindu. I'll tell you more about him at some other time. He actually spent some time in our house, and I actually watched him give a sermon on the Vedas, which was fascinating, combining the Gospel of John, the Vedas, and again, combining these wisdom traditions in an interesting unity. And Russell Paul, a musician who I met alongside of Father B. Griffiths, again, this combination of music, art, and belief, which is very much part of what Hinduism is. So Hinduism gets defined as Sanatana Dharma, which is basically the idea that the teachings are timeless. And if you think about this, the Vedas, which were written 1200 BCE, came out of a much earlier way of believing about things. And so I know that top part is cut off, but it basically says experience rather than belief-based. So the importance of Hinduism is that you experience the belief itself. It's important that you actually feel it. It's part of your life. So again, applicable to all people, all places and times. So effectively, you could say that everybody who believes in anything is a Hindu, because it doesn't really have a defined belief system in the way that we think of it. When it says devoid of sectarianism and denominationalism, that's a fancy way of saying there's no one right way to do it, right? It can be done so many different ways. And the different sensibilities of people lead to different ways of understanding what the religion is. So this idea of the flow of the Dharma is important. If you see in that second section, it doesn't matter what you call it. It's just a matter of living it in your own way. So you can do this in ways that are unique to your own individual sensibility, which is important. So this sort of speaks to the same kind of pantheism that we saw in Black Elk, this idea that you can find God in all things, and this idea that the teachings can be found in all things. It can be found in actions. It can be found in manifestations in gods. It can be found in yogas, which is, again, forms of practice, yoking your way back to the eternal. So this idea of higher goals of life and the true nature of things found in this deep, timeless tradition. This is the concept of Sanatana Dharma. So Swami Vivekananda, who was an early Swami, a Swami is basically a name of a Hindu teacher. It's gotten a bad name because of a lot of the Western movies about Swamis as sort of quacks and people that don't really know what they're talking about. But a Swami is somebody who spent their whole life studying Hindu philosophy. This idea that we each have a soul which is potentially divine, and we basically are moving through eternity, and we have to kind of come to terms with the fact that we're part of something much, much bigger than ourselves. So you can do the work however you want. You can be, somebody who finds it through your devotion to a certain thing, your schoolwork or your professional life. You can find it through worship. You can find it through singing and music. You can find it through psychic control. That's a way of looking at meditation. This is a very internal-based religion that talks about states of mind and states of consciousness. The original language of Hinduism was Sanskrit, which is a language that really has hundreds of different ways of describing both spiritual states and psychological states in ways that we just don't even think about in the West. So it's interesting to people who are introspective and think about different aspects of themselves. So this idea of doctrine, right? These dogmas or rituals, it doesn't matter what you do as long as it gets you to where you want to be. So this idea that these, what you believe and what temple you go to don't really matter very much. And I think that's what Vivekananda is saying here. Another way of looking at the Hindu way of belief is looking at the Om. An Om is a mantra, and the mantras come out of the Vedas. The Vedas were the original texts of Hinduism. And so what's interesting is that this religion is heavily based in sound. And if you look at what Om is, these are the sounds. The Ah sound, which is the waking sound. It's made in the center of the mouth. These are all the Ah, the Oo or the O sound, and the sound are all sounds that you make without your tongue. In other words, they're primal sounds. So all sound, as we know, comes from two things striking together, whether it's your vocal cords or whether it's the sound of hands clapping. This is the sound that's made by things coming together. And the Om, as Hindus view it, is the primal sound that doesn't get made that way. It's sort of the sound of the universe. It's the sound of that kind of background that we all could unify into. So this concept of Brahman, or all of reality, we're a small part of that large reality, and we can come into it through this way of expressing things. So the ah sound, the waking sound in the center of the mouth, is kind of the physical world. It's where reason and science come in. We get into our waking mind. We move into the O sound, the vibration in the back of the mouth. That's the realm of dreams and divinities and imagination. That's your inner world, right? That's the realm of creativity. So if you look at that, the ow sound starts at the bottom of the om. You move into that sort of mid-region, which is in that dream state. And then you finally get to the sound, which is the realm of this sort of deep dreamless sleep. Or if you look at it, the left side, the heavenly region. So you're kind of coming into higher states of consciousness, which you can do through meditation or through chanting, which is what the om is part of. So the om is this sound, beyond sound of absolute being, and it speaks to trying to get to ultimately that highest part, the infinity, the self. So we have an infinite part of ourself which can connect to the infinite world in which we live, in the universe in which we live, through this practice. So it's a symbol of the practice. So what does Om symbolize? Om symbolizes this idea of a yoga, a practice, a yoking your way back to a larger reality, which you can do if you are devoted to this way of thinking and practicing. It's actually a deep form of philosophy, and it also comes in the form of a sound. So there are a lot of differences between Western religion and Hinduism, obviously. Western religion tends to be very historical. If you think about Abraham or Jesus or Muhammad, these are historical figures. They deliver doctrines and teachings that then have to be understood by their followers. They're all monotheistic religions. They believe in the unity of God, but a God that's usually separate from creation in some way. They're all based in institutions, whether it's the temple or a church or a synagogue, a group of people. They depend heavily on faith, right? This idea that you have to believe in God in order to access the religion. And they tend to be sectarian, which means they tend to break into different groups because of differences in the way that they think about how the belief should be practiced. So if you think about Protestants and Catholics, for example, the only real difference between them is they don't think that the sacraments, the practices of the religion, should be done the same way. And that divides the church completely, even though their larger belief system is the same. So for Hindus, that doesn't make any sense, right? They believe the same thing. They're just getting at it in different ways, and Hinduism embraces that difference. So Hinduism looks at religion as this sort of mysterious and unknowable thing. It's the mystery of life that we should be searching for. That you can find the spiritual laws by your intuition and by your practice, that your individual experience should be emphasized. However you experience it is the truth. You can experience the truth without somebody telling you what it is. There's no human founder. There's no prophet, or there are many prophets, if you want to look at it that way, right? There are lots of forms of truth. There are a lot of different forms of gurus and teachings. And it relies very heavily on high states of consciousness. So it really depends on yoga, meditation, mindfulness really emerges out of Hinduism. It's non-denominational because it doesn't matter what you believe, whatever form of God is fine. You can do what you want as long as you're getting to your way of understanding the larger truth. So that makes it a kind of a universalist religion. So Hindu Dharma, to summarize, there's only one high reality, but there are literally infinite ways to approach it. We all emerge from the same place. There's a lot of unity that we need to understand if we can get to a deeper sense of ourselves. There are a huge variety of institutions that can arise out of this. This idea that they're thinking there's only one way comes from ignorance. Ignorance comes from this idea that there's only one doctrine. Obviously, truth must be more complex than that. And overall, what this idea that you find the truth from within yourself, not within a temple or a church. So this is what Hinduism is in general, and I hope that gives you some idea of how the religion is defined.